But sort of came to this conclusion that it didn't matter how well I taught Romeo and Juliet if somebody hadn't had breakfast. It didn't matter how great of a relationship I had with my kids if, and so at that point sort of felt like, how do I affect larger systems change that can stop some of this inequity stuff?
I'm Brandon Dawson, and this is The Distiller, a podcast about how we find meaningful work and how we find meaning in the work we do. My guests for this episode are Kate HANISIAN and Ramsey Ford. They're the founders of Design Impact, which is a nonprofit social design firm that's working on issues of complex social change in Cincinnati. There is a lot of cultural discussion right now around human-centered design, but it can be difficult to know exactly what that means in specific contexts. Kate does a better job of distilling that here than I've previously heard, and she specifically addresses how not using a human-centered approach limits the effectiveness of ideas and solutions in social change. If you're at all interested in creative solutions to social problems, or even just hearing how someone approaches the thorny issues of systemic inequity, then this is the discussion for you. I met Kate and Ramsey at the brand new Branch Restaurant, a gorgeous new restaurant and bar built into the historic Central Trust Bank building in Cincinnati's East Walnut Hills neighborhood. Branch and its cozy downstairs bar Night Drop are both absolutely beautiful, and manager John Ford and the staff of Branch opened the doors to us just before they opened for the evening service on a Friday afternoon. You can check out thedistillerpodcast.com for photos of their space and of our conversation. The Distiller is a series of conversations about meaningful work, as we say, and personally, few people have shaped my idea of meaningful work and my relationship to it more than Kate and Ramsey, although they may not actually know that. I'm sure the reasons why will be apparent to you as you listen. So here is my conversation with Kate HANISIAN and Ramsey Ford on The Distiller. Welcome to both of you, and thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's exciting to talk to you both. Have you been on the podcast before?
One time.
We were just on Humanize Me.
Yes.
On Bart's podcast?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Totally.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Not just. I mean, it was like 6 months, 7 months ago.
Nice.
Yeah,
Bart
that
was
was our first
on
time.
my show three
neat.
months ago, something like that.
Fun.
He's
Yeah.
super interesting
His
guy.
energy is great.
Yeah. Energy is right.
Yeah.
Well, I like to start off by sort of just asking people, when people ask you what you do for a living, what do you tell them?
This is just hard because it's the both of us, and I know that we would answer. We both have like the formal way of answering, I'm sure, which is that we
You go. Wherever,
we run a nonprofit social design firm out of Cincinnati, Ohio.
All right.
So there's the elevator pitch that surrounds that concept. But what do you do for a living, Kate?
Somebody asked me this last night, actually.
Uh-huh.
I said I work on complex social change, but then people look at you like, what?
Right.
And, we work on taking complex social change and innovating on it from the perspective of the people most affected by the problem.
Okay. And obviously there's a lot in that. And that's what I want to talk about. Just setting the stage that you do very, very complex work that is hard to describe.
It's hard to describe. Yeah, it's like that question even always makes me like, oh man, we should have a better sort of elevator 2 second, whatever description. But
well, take a second and just describe. So you are the founders of Design Impact, and take a second and maybe not the elevator version, but a little more detail about what Design Impact is and what it does, and just to set the stage, because I kind of want to go back and describe like how you got here and how Design Impact started.
Yeah.
But first, let's talk about what it is and what it does in as much detail as you want to get into.
Yeah, sure.
So we're a nonprofit. There's about 10 of us. We're a group of, my background's in design. Kate's background is in education. We have people with community development backgrounds, community organizing backgrounds, social sector research, communications, other designers.
It's
So it's a
multidisciplinary.
very multidisciplinary space. And what we really do is we partner mostly with organizations. So children's hospitals, United Ways, school systems, county governments, that sort of thing, who have kind of intractable social inequities that they're working on.
Okay.
Which, by their nature are complex. And what we what we would do is we partnered deeply with them to kind of go through a process, and that process is sometimes literally a day. That's usually not the most effective process in the world. To up to like our longest, some partners we've been working with for years.
Right.
And we go through what's called a human-centered design process.
Okay.
It's kind of the core of how we work. So it's a space where you're doing creative works that is very much focused on bringing kind of your user voice deeply within that space.
Okay. Give a brief example of a client that you worked with, because all that's theoretical at this point, and just give us a snapshot of what that means. How did somebody get in touch with you? What was their need? How did you decide to work with them, and what came out of it?
Sure. Did you have a project that's in your mind?
I mean, I love talking about Cincinnati Children's Hospital is a good
Go for
one.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Go for it.
So Cincinnati Children's Hospital, here in Cincinnati, in Avondale, like number 2 children's hospital in the nation.
Yep.
Amazing. They were sitting in a neighborhood that had some of the worst infant mortality rates in the country. So there's kind of like a dichotomy there that they wanted to work with. And so they started a program called All Children Thrive, which is really working to make Cincinnati a place where every single child has a chance to thrive.
Okay.
And what they wanted us to help with was really on the front end of that is trying to say, like, well, as a medical professionals, we can define thriving with all of these metrics.
Yeah.
But what does that mean to community members that we're trying to work with, and we're trying to make spaces where everybody can thrive?
Okay.
And so they asked us to basically help them figure that out. So bring the voice of community deeply into like kind of their ongoing process of change around that. So we ran there was a competitive RFP. We won that RFP. We started doing work with them. Our strategy was to basically
RFP, for people who don't know, request for proposal.
Request for proposal.
Thank you.
So it's
Sorry.
it just means that there were other firms or people that were trying to get that work.
Yep.
And so we basically recruited and trained about 8 what we called peer researchers from 2 different communities who were focused on the Avondale and Price Hill communities in Cincinnati, which are very different demographically and geographically. And we basically recruited, trained community members, women, to basically do research with their peers and bring that in, kind of to really get us past kind of like the commonly held voices within that system.
Awesome.
And so we did, I think about 24 interviews, a bunch of observations, some focus groups, and then convened large community meetings of both those peer researchers, people who were researched, other people that were interested, clinicians, nonprofit executives, et cetera, to come together and synthesize that information and then come up with ideas and eventually prototype and try out community-led solutions that would result in certain ways with all children thriving in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
And that was like a 2.5 year process.
Okay.
Yeah. So like an example of a solution that came out of that was a program called Justice Promoters, where dealing with noticing the connection between high eviction rates in communities and how that affects community health. And so trying to reduce the number of evictions by training by community members that live within buildings, becoming sort of leaders within their community to train and sit down with folks that live in their apartment buildings to do something called decoding your lease. So how do you actually understand what you're signing? How do you, advocate yourself for that? I think the powerful thing about that model was that the idea came from community, and it was then decoding your lease worksheet was designed by community and with community, and then those solutions were led by community. So it's not a lawyer just coming knocking on your door saying, these are your rights. I think there's something about leadership development along the way of what we're saying is who has power over who in the implementation of social change in the lives of the people it affects, who should have that power, and how do we support community members in that pursuit. So that's an ongoing program now.
Okay. And that's the human-centered design part of it. For people who aren't familiar with that term, is really starting with the human, with the individual need, not taking an idea or a solution from the institution, but coming at it from deep research into the person who's most affected and having the solutions come from them?
Absolutely. I'd say that we use human-centered design as a sort of base foundation, but we layer our theory of change, to get wonky, is like a Venn diagram, and one of those circles is creativity and human-centered design, but the other two circles are equity and leadership. So we are not, if we wanted to just be a human-centered design firm, we would hire all designers, but that's why we have a multidisciplinary firm. We feel very strongly that the human-centered design process needs to be deeply rooted in awareness of equity, inequity, racial tension, racial equality, and then also leadership development. So and that's where we think about how do we develop leaders, both leaders of large systems like the heads of Children's Hospital and also community leaders, to be able to work in an inclusive way, to understand the power of community voice, to use creativity in their work, to be comfortable with ambiguity, to have learning mindsets, not expert mindsets. And so we see the human-centered design process as a piece of what we do, but we layer those other things on it pretty heavily.
Awesome. So I want to come back to all of that. That's amazing context setting. Let's talk about like how you guys got here. You said your background, Ramsey was in design, Kate was in education. Talk a little bit about like, where did you go straight out of college? What did you study?
Yeah.
Maybe we'll start with you, Kate, and then go to Ramsey. What did you do professionally that led to you guys deciding to do this?
Sure.
And how did you get here?
Yeah, so my background, although I have a master's in education and taught for some time, I more broadly would sort of define it as social justice work. That started, for me, started in sort of high school, and then in college, I actually thought I was going to go into the ministry. And so I became an English major thinking I would go on to get a master's in divinity. And studied abroad, not in any sort of religious context, but studied and lived in Kingston for 3.5 months. And that was really transformative for me in terms of seeing poverty on a global scale, and worked a lot with preschoolers. And it was neat. It was a program where we learned about how society is structured in order to, why that inequity is created. So it wasn't just me coming and teaching at a preschool, but I actually went to college in Jamaica during that time in Kingston to look at, the systems and how they work, literature and how it supports the history of the Caribbean, and then volunteered in a preschool. It was just the first time I think I'd seen poverty on that sort of scale and understood how it's deeply tied to systems and global systems even. And anyway, and so I sort of caught the bug there. And then after college, I wasn't really sure if I wanted to go into the ministry anymore, but I moved to New Zealand. So I lived and worked with Maori youth. So Maori are the native population in New Zealand, who have really done a lot of work leading around in terms of the first peoples around the world, having the most success in terms of land reclamation and things like that from colonialism.
And representation in national
in
politics.
Government, exactly. Still, though, obviously fighting a lot of battles there. And so lived and worked there and did some youth development work. And again, was just like saw systems work and inequity and fascinated by that. And then came home and came back to Cincinnati and wasn't sure what I was going to do. I sort of accidentally became a reading instructor in the West End and at a new school that was, most of the kids were from that area, but all of the kids were on free and reduced lunch. And it was a, 98% African American, low income school, and learned a lot there. Loved my students, stayed with still friends with a lot of the students 20 years later, but sort of came to this conclusion that it didn't matter how well I taught Romeo and Juliet if somebody hadn't had breakfast. Yeah. Like it really, it didn't matter how great of a relationship I had with my kids if, and so at that point sort of felt like, how do I affect larger systems change that can stop some of this inequity stuff? And so the last job I had before meeting Ramsey and I decided to run Design Impact was so I said, who works on large systems change? I looked at, it's nonprofits, and I didn't really know much about them, so I thought I should go work for one. So I started working at the Ohio Justice and Policy Center. It's a criminal justice reform organization around the state of Ohio. And I learned a lot of the students that I had been working with had parents that were incarcerated, and so really saw that connection, like the school to prison pipeline, how that happens in our society, and learned a lot about criminal justice reform, and learned a lot from my amazing colleagues there. And that is where I met Ramsey during that period. Well, I met you right at the end of
OJPs.
Well, I
Du
met
Bois.
you. I met you at a party in high school. Let's be real. But that's another
Cincinnati.
story. That's another
Yeah,
story.
yeah.
But we started dating, I guess.
You were
then
still
I
at
was
school.
teaching.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, but that's sort of the trajectory at pre-design impact. So spent about 4 years in each one of those.
Okay.
Those both at OJPC and teaching.
Was the motivation originally to go into the ministry, was that the same motivation that led you to work in the social sector? And
I don't know. I had to do. There's things I love about spirituality, about the religion, but some of the things I didn't love. I had to actually undo a lot of learning around sort of like this idea of poor people needing help.
Yeah.
Which is a very colonial way to look at it, to say that and really a lot of that is biblical in nature that comes, and it's beautiful. I think it comes from a really good place, but so there's been work that's been done in that name that really actually perpetuates power imbalance in the society and in the work that we see. So for me, it was, I think, understanding that it is our role in society to love and care for one another came from my Christian background, and that's the best way we can live is for all of us to be bound up in each other's liberation. But how that manifested, I didn't see that manifesting in the church quite the way I wanted to learn about it in the world.
that idea, just say more a little bit about that idea of poor people needing help, as opposed to what's the difference in in how you
The
think
difference
about it now?
is poor people people experiencing poverty. First of all, not even saying poor people, people that are experiencing poverty or challenges, having control and having power enough to create change. And so a lot of that is how we look at the systems that are continuing to it's one, you know what I mean, to keep people in those places. Like I'm much more interested in stopping, in changing for example, I'm much more interested in getting people $15 an hour instead of $9 an hour, rather than getting bowls of soup out at at soup kitchens. Well, soup kitchens are great. I'm not criticizing soup kitchens.
Sure. But long term,
I'm just saying, that can, sometimes that's about feeling good for the giver, but like, what does it actually mean when we look at the mirror in ourselves, those of us that have had a lot of privilege in life, we look at the mirror and we look at our systems that have a lot of power and say, where are those systems at fault or at stake, or where can they be improved so that we don't keep getting this, what we see in our society is growing inequity, and growing disparity.
Systemic change instead of just putting Band-Aids on.
Yeah, and also, and some turning the mirror on ourselves.
Right.
Versus saying, I need to fix you, poor person. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yep.
You know what I mean? It's your fault. Versus, no, actually, how am I perpetuating this?
Right.
You know?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And Ramsey, talk a little bit of, your background, design background coming out of college.
Yeah, no. So
How
I got
did you get here?
industrial design degree, and took that and moved from Cincinnati to Boston, and eventually found full-time employment at a small design firm in Marblehead, Massachusetts, called Tool Inc. That basically was my first like big-time real job, and we designed like sporting goods and electronic equipment, things like that.
Yep.
But there was a lot of. It was a small business that was doing a lot of entrepreneurial kind of work. So they had started their own product development business, like outside of just being a product development business. They had their own products that they were selling, that they were doing on the side, that they were manufacturing and going out. There were golf products that I helped design, and I've literally never played golf in my life, but they were. But I learned a lot about just what a small business looks like, and what it can take, and how you can kind of like make something real. That you don't need someone else's permission to do that necessarily. So that was my first job out of school. I was there for a couple of years. I re-met Kate as an adult and decided to move back to Cincinnati. So moved back here and really just didn't want to get back into a full-time gig again. So I freelanced at some places, largely at a design firm called Kaleidoscope. I taught at the University of Cincinnati in their design program. I was trying to develop and marketed a soft-sided pill container for
Soft and silent pill organization.
Look it up.
It works.
It was
works.
solid.
It's great. The pill pod.
I love it.
Got a patent on that. Didn't make any money.
You made clocks? Yes. You made clocks?
Yeah, right. It could still turn.
It's going to come through.
And I was doing art, just cartooning, had a couple different cartoon series I was putting out there. Basically a ton of stuff that wasn't making a lot of money except for, kind of a 20-hour-a-week contract doing design work, basically, which was cool. And that was going on for 5 years or so before we started Design Impact.
You were teaching,
at that
did
point.
you say that?
Yeah, I was teaching
Sorry.
at that point too.
Yeah.
So at what point, here we are, we're at the place where this starts. At what point did you guys first have the idea of doing something together at all?
Yeah.
And was that this?
No. We were living in Kentucky, so it would have been like 2004.
Sure, yeah.
We were just recently, I had recently moved back, and
Yeah.
I don't know why. I don't know what struck us about we should do something together,
It's
but it was
super
obvious
weird.
that
We just were like,
do
we should
something
work together. This is
Yeah.
obvious.
Yeah.
I don't know why
Yeah.
I've never felt that with anyone else in the whole world. Like, I mean, that you have good connections with people, but it was
Sure,
like,
but not that you want to spend all your days.
no, it was weird. We looked at buildings. We were gonna start a pancake business.
We were gonna start a pancake sandwich shop. So
Oh, you would
the
make sandwiches out of
were the bread.
pancakes.
Okay,
It's a good idea.
love it. Please do that. I'll eat those.
Trademark.
and then an art
yeah.
van.
An
We were
art-
gonna drive an art.
Like a nonprofit art fan education thing.
Okay. Yeah.
Like a community, like a very community centered coffee shop.
Oh yeah, we went deep with that. We
just
went and looked at shops. and
Tons of
buildings.
big money making ideas.
Obviously. But what was the if you can remember back, what was the attraction to working together? Other than just spending time together, was there something about your complementary skills that you thought would work?
What's so funny is I don't think either of us remember why we both just knew we should work together. I remember sitting in that front room in Covington, whiteboarding out the coffee shop or the art van.
Yeah, I think we just. I mean, part of it I think was just like I didn't have a full-time job, so there was this this idea that you could we can make something outside
You
of
really
out of a
helped
space.
me understand that. Yeah, you are innately a maker.
Yeah,
I think I would have just not. I wouldn't have
Right.
thought of starting something. He's an I mean, I think you had an entrepreneurial spirit that I leaned into, and sort of was like, wow, we could, because he had crafted this life,
Right.
where he didn't have a singular job, and I was just like, and was supporting, bringing in money, but also doing things he loved, and I was like,
Right.
oh, you don't have to. It sounds stupid, but I hadn't thought
No, I don't think it sounds stupid at
we
all.
could create something.
Yeah,
I think it was the process of creation versus working together. It's like, let's create,
Right.
and then.
and listen, we just got. I mean, and then beyond that, I think we just got along well. Conversations flowed. We brought out aspects. We're very we share a lot of similar traits and values. But then the way we look at problems and the way that we work
Show
with
up.
people and show up is really different, and it is complementary. It's easier to see that now, but I think we sensed there was a lot. I mean, we kind of threw ourselves into a romantic relationship really quickly.
We did.
Too. So I think it was just kind of this there was an intuitive sense around
Right.
this is going to work out.
Yeah.
I mean, knock on wood, it's been
far.
at least for the past 14 years.
It's still early.
Yeah. But I mean, there was a sense there around that, and it was just waiting for the right idea.
Interesting.
I'm glad we got to Design Impact, because I'm not sure any of those other ideas were going to make it.
I mean, I still think about the coffee shop sometimes.
I think about that pancake sandwich shop.
Well, when the other soft-sided pill idea comes through and the ship comes in,
The clogs. You should have seen the felt clogs,
other
man.
businesses.
Those were special.
No, I think that maker mindset. That's actually something that I have really. A few episodes ago, I talked to Beth Graves and Christy Goodfellow. They're both potters. I don't know if you know them.
I don't know them.
But Beth makes toys. Christy makes really nice pottery.
Huh.
But one of the things that came through was this idea that there are people who, when they have an idea, think that idea could be real, and then there's people that, when they have an idea, don't have the slightest notion of how something gets made.
Right.
Yeah.
And those are really two different mindsets that until you're part of the process of making something and switch over into everything that exists didn't exist at one point, and somebody thought of it and figured out how to make it exist.
Yeah.
That's a big transition into that sort of maker mindset. So I think that's really
That's
significant.
interesting. That's a neat parallel.
makes sense.
And I think that ties. Both of us would define ourselves as problem solvers, like people that love to tackle problems and figure out how to. That's the designer, I think, in both of us. So that makes sense. That. Well, hey, we could figure this out, right?
Right.
I mean, we screwed up along the way, which we have totally, but you
Sure.
know.
But still, we
let's
should still try it.
Yeah.
So how did that energy become what eventually became Design Impact? What did you actually start first?
So I feel like what we had was these conversations. So I was practicing design, but I had been interested. I'll tell from my perspective, and you see if this fits.
This is the fun
I'd
part.
I'd always been interested in just like you get in design because maybe you like to draw or that sort of thing. But then also once you're there, you get kind of sold on this idea that like you can design a better world. You can design things that solve problems. You can make people's lives more joyful, more easy, whatever that happens to be.
How do you get from I know how to draw pictures to I can change the world?
That's the fucked up part. Is that like you don't like it's kind of it's a little bit of a falsehood. But like the thing is like when you get started, especially in industrial design, like you get challenges like, and they're often in school there are a lot of things like this is take a lawnmower and make it better for the consumer kind of loosely, and then it gets more specific. But then by the time you're in a professional context, a lot of what you're doing is, it's not that you're inventing the new like iWatch or whatever. It's that like there's an engineer and people that have done that, and you're basically putting a sheen on top of it to make it like marketable, And a lot of what you're doing is involved with products that like. You could make an argument that like certain technology products makes people's lives a lot easier. You can make a lot of downside arguments too.
Sure.
But that's how you get from you draw pictures of things and those pictures become real things that people use.
But I think it's important because this becomes that human-centered design piece, which is kind of what sets you guys apart. That you didn't just decide, I want to make a difference in the world, I want to have a social impact, and therefore, not that you would have, but that I'm going to leave my design background behind. You said the things that I have learned about how things get designed and made, the processes that I have learned about how I go from the initial idea to the reality of a solution is the system that I'm going to apply to social change. That's a fairly unique
and I think
idea.
That came out of just us, literally smoking cigarettes out of the window of our apartment after work, talking about I apply a design process in contexts that I don't always value. Kate's constantly working in contexts that are creating value for society, but is interested in the possibility of having other creative processes.
Well, I think I felt like when I learned about design at first, we used to get in these like theoretical arguments about design and but I think when I understood like Ramsey spent an entire year basically listening and talking to folks who were doing laundry in order to understand how to cut 3 seconds off of laundry time. And how much dignity we give to consumers in the design of consumer products blew me away. Not only he sat in their homes, he talked to them, he listened to them, he tried to understand their beliefs and how that tied to their ideas as women and what that meant.
Right.
And then would bring those same people in to generate ideas around products. And I thought, we don't do this. This comes back to this, and to beat a dead horse, but come back to this idea that we assume we know what's best for people. So the way the social sector works, and when I say social sector, I mean philanthropy and government benefits programs, is we sort of say, here's people that are usually never experiencing those problems make the decisions for how money flows down. And it usually flows down 5 or 6 levels before it hits the people who are most affected by the problem, who never have any say in the design of how those programs reach them.
Who have it just handed to them.
Have it to them and should be thankful.
Right.
And often those programs, let alone the sort of the troubling theoretical issues with that, it's also the programs are less effective. We know that when we design things based on deep understandings of consumers, those are better products.
Right.
But why don't we apply that same thinking when we design social solutions?
If you came at P&G with a product idea and ran it up the ladder to your management and hadn't done exhaustive consumer research and validation, they would throw it out the door.
Exactly. Exactly. And so that to me was we the sector could use it. Having worked with enough organizations at that point in schools and seen how powerful it was. And so I think that's when and Ramsey loved design. He just didn't love the ends of what he was getting to work on. And I love working on social change work, but didn't always love the environments. The creative and innovative part. I think it's not just because creativity is fun. It's because we know that when we think divergently, we get to better solutions.
Yeah, the process works.
Yeah. So I felt like, I think that was when we started to, and you, I mean, we're at this time then getting your master's.
Yeah, so that inspired me those conversations inspired me to then like really focus a master's. I had a chance to go back and get a master's degree at DAB.
Okay.
Which is the design school in Cincinnati.
Yep.
And I focused on the connection between human-centered design and community organizing as a parallel process for community change.
Okay.
And so that was kind of gave us like beyond conversations, like a theoretical basis for the work. And we were gonna we basically were just like, hey, like when we finish the masters, let's kind of quit our jobs. Let's go mainly kind of like do some international work and see what we can do with this.
We both had done international work before, and we're both sort of ready to do something different, and it saved a little bit of money. And so we thought, okay, let's, we had like $3,000 or something, $5,000 or something. We were going to like travel and
change the world on $5,000. It was a book idea.
No, I think we were just thinking lightly about it. Like, let's go volunteer somewhere and see if we can apply this thinking in a way that community wants and makes sense and is helpful.
Okay.
And we're going to be sort of open about it. And then at the time, Ramsey was working. You tell us.
I was at Kaleidoscope, the design firm in town, and basically just like had this like very chance meeting with the CEO. And I was only like a 20-hour-a-week contractor there. But I think he was interested in recruiting me longer term into the firm.
Yep.
And so we had a conversation about 5-year plans. And this is like right after we had had this conversation.
Yeah,
so I was
where do you want to be in 5 years?
So I was very honestly said, like, I want to be doing this other thing.
Yeah.
And this like amazing response came back that just said
Amazing.
like, well, why don't you tell me more about that and why couldn't we be a part of that with you?
Cool.
Which is where we went from like, let's try our little idea to like eventually we basically we put together a pitch deck, like got feedback, refined it, pitched to the lawyers, refined it, pitched to the accountants, refined it, and eventually got funding to like actually start a nonprofit to do this work.
Wow.
That was about a year.
It was an incredible
9 months
opportunity.
of process.
I feel like was, just awesome. And
Yeah.
I think that speaks a lot about Matt Cornell and putting, just deciding to do something valuable with his, the profits his company was making.
So that was Design Impact.
Yeah, well, we did a whole naming thing, and Design Impact was the best name we could come up with.
Only because of the logo.
Well, we drew the logo first. It was a good logo. So we stuck with it. We've gotten feedback that it's not easy to protect as a name. So, well, whatever. It's our name.
Yeah, it's your name. And what was because this was travel-based and you were going to go to India and you were going to, this wasn't the Design Impact that Design Impact is today.
No.
So what was that mission when you finally refined that idea? What were you going to do and how were you going to do it?
Well, I think a lot of it was to apply like what Ramsey had learned in his thesis around what is the connection between human-centered design process and community organizing. So a lot of what we learned and thought about was what's most important in any sort of design process is to sit and listen and be with community first before making assumptions about what you should work on or whatever, and that community should drive that process. Okay. So that is sort of the model that we followed and had a connection, and it was kind of a long story, but ended up in India, in a village with a nonprofit we were very intentional about wanting to work with an organization that was led by the community they were serving, versus there's large large Western sort of like UN dominated programs, things like that. Yeah. We wanted smaller grassroots work. And so we just stayed and they had a volunteer program. They wanted us to come. So we just stayed and lived for the first 3 months before even taking on any sort of project to build relationships and just be in community and listen and learn.
Awesome.
And then through that, by working with community and asking that community where we could be helpful, sort of started to generate the first 2 projects that we worked on. Yeah. And
what were those?
Well, at that time, so Ramsey's background was in industrial design or product design. They were product-based. So one was a charcoal briquette that reduced indoor air emissions. So if you are familiar with the problems with wood-burning fires inside and how the respiratory illnesses and death that causes. It was a particular thing that the community, this organization, had already done some work with, but needed refining and needed to look at the market, the design of the product itself, how it was packaged, would people use it, understand behavior around it to change those health outcomes. And then the other was a fair trade soap. Actually, the small organization that it really needed was a small biofuel making facility that for local farmers. It was an agricultural area. And when you make biofuel, you get glycerin as a byproduct. And so they had all this glycerin and they were like, what should we do with it? And they heard about fair trade as a thing. And so had started pressing soaps, but didn't really know what fair trade consumers wanted. Should they do this? And so we spent quite a bit of time.
2 years.
2 years working on fair trade soap in a village in Tiruchuli, India.
Fantastic. And how? That's
so
2 years.
That get to, yeah. So then.
No, that's it though. How does that? Right. What then? You made some soap. 2 years on soap.
No. So then we about 6 or 8 months. We're keeping this little blog that we think only our mothers were reading.
They're definitely the only people commenting on the blog.
With lots of
I think other people might have read
exclamation
it.
points and hugs. And so somehow it got picked up by a larger design in the web and the internet. And so we started getting emails from designers around the world, really, saying, what you're doing is really cool. Can I help? And at the same time, we were meeting other nonprofits in India called NGOs. So other NGOs around that were saying, we could really use this kind of perspective or this kind of thinking. Could you come work with us? And so we thought, well, we can't be in all these places at the same time. What if we started a fellowship program? So this is, again, about your idea, of when you have an idea, and some people, neither of us knew anything about a fellowship program. There's the two of us sitting in plastic stools in India saying, well, how might one start a fellowship program?
Right.
So we did
Let's
some
find
research
out.
and sketched some stuff out and researched and listened to people that had done that before and sketched out a fellowship program and got it funded by the National Endowment for the Arts, which still blows me away.
Yeah, it was nuts.
And we'll never forget the day that 6 people, they came from all over the world, including India, designers, and 6 people stepped off a plane to come to our fellowship program.
Holy cow.
Where we were just
nuts. Because it's when it's your own butt on the line, it's your own butt on the line, and you can be a fool on your own.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden you had 6 other people that
we're this
literally
is
we
a
have no
legitimate
credibility,
program.
and they are quit jobs and moved
they
across the
quit their
world in
jobs.
some cases.
Right.
To come
quit from frog design and big places.
That you'd never met.
No, never
just
met.
Seen
just
the resumes, had
interviewed
they
on
had the
Skype.
conversations.
We Skype interviewed them. So
Yeah.
Yeah, we got a lot of
Sure,
applicants. We got over 150 applicants. It was crazy.
amazing.
It was nuts. There was a need. There was a
still
real
is.
strong need and desire for it.
There's a lot of
So
designers
it's cool.
that want to do this kind of work.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then we ran a fellowship program. We ran it a second time. So we ran 2 rounds of a fellowship
Yeah.
program. Then
And-
we branched.
And what was interesting about that, when those first couple of projects were product-based social enterprises, which was kind of the change model. But then when we did the fellowships, we moved into helping people design women's empowerment programs and nutritional supplements and online, databases to connect tutors of youth. So it really diversified, and I think really was one of the things that opened us up to what Design It Back would become, was saying, one of the reasons we were in India in the first place was because of product-based things, and then we realized that there's a lot of other things we could do.
Yeah.
Yeah, you keep going.
Yeah. So that was humming along. Some projects were better than others. Some were.
How long were you there?
Well, a total of 2.5 or so years.
Okay.
And then the fellowship for 2 years.
Yeah. Right. So
It was about we were solid for 4, doing India work. Us personally, we weren't there the whole time.
Right.
Yeah.
But we were
most
doing
of it.
the first 4.5 years were all India.
Yeah. And learned a ton through that time. And sort of came to this point that we either need to move here permanently full-time and get citizenship or apply this model back in the U.S. The reason so there was a lot of things going on. I was very sick. My body did not take well, and I got quite ill. And we had some family members that were ill at home. India changed its visa laws, making it really hard for us to stay more than 3 months at a time. It was just sort of a series of things, and we sort of came to this point. And we were having a hard time funding it. So almost all of the international work that's done from the U.S. to anywhere in the world is funded on the coasts. There are, if you think about it, even, do you know many international organizations in Cincinnati or people that fund internationally? They don't. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's a mentality or what. But so we just did not have, especially because we were living in India, we did not have a lot of contacts in DC and in where a lot of the international dollars flow. Yeah. Again, we were funded by the National Endowment for the Arts and Kaleidoscope through and funding. But the people we knew, our networks were mostly in Cincinnati, and those folks were not funding international work at all. So we we missed doing the work ourselves. So that was the other thing about the model, is we were ending up we didn't get to do any of the work ourselves. We were just making sure we were doing a lot of logistic stuff with fellows. So there's a lot of things that sort of led us to think maybe we need to rethink this model. We know that the work has value. We were getting really good results, but maybe the model isn't right. So we really innovated on the model at that time. And also met some amazing folks from the Center for Creative Leadership out of North Carolina, and started doing leadership development work around innovation, and looking at the connection between innovation design and leadership development. For example, empathy is a huge skill that you have to employ in design, right? How do you empathize with whoever is you're solving for? And that's also a leadership development skill. And how do those play off each other in what we're developing? So started to see that we could do work in a different way. And so decided to move back to Cincinnati and start the work here. While what's great is that a lot of those solutions or programs were still going. So our model has always been that it's the organization that holds that will become the soap buyer or the implementer of the long-term solution. So what's cool is that a few of those projects are still running in India now. Okay. But then we moved back here, and I'll stop talking now. It's a long. It's quite a story.
This is the story. Because what you're doing is such transformative, interesting work now. And this is great because the story that you're telling is we figured it out as we went along.
Totally.
And that's fantastic.
We did not know, and still feel in that space.
Yeah, no.
We don't know.
Absolutely.
You obviously know a lot, though.
We know a ton of things, but we don't know.
Still don't know.
But there's so many. But in the world, I think part of it is as an org, though, we also believe that like you have to be able to change. You have to be able to adapt to do this work, to serve the communities we're trying to serve, to change the systems we're trying to change. A big part of that is we teach it, and I think part of who we are is walking that walk. Right. Which means that while we have expertise, we're always learning and recognize that we need to know more. Yeah.
Well, so how do you do that? Because you move back to the United States, you have this model, you've learned a ton of stuff, and then you have to move back into Cincinnati, into a culture that where the social sector is largely dominated by that we're going to bring a solution to you, and here it is mindset. Yeah. And you know what you want to do, or at least you have a better idea about it. But essentially, you're starting something brand new.
Yeah, and the model needed to change.
Yeah, in a town that that work is largely dominated by the United Way and larger and very well-meaning organizations, but with entirely different models. Talk a little bit about you move back, and where do you start? How do you create the same traction?
I wonder if we'll frame this the same.
Yeah, no,
you go. We haven't talked about that. It was an interesting year or two.
Yeah, I remember
reframing. It was hard.
I have some specific times. So we did a hard pivot, on that model, which meant that
ended the fellowship program.
All of the assets that we had built around one weren't transferable to the other for the most part.
Yeah,
and so
everything was.
So we went from us 6 full-time fellows, a grant writer and a staff member in India, to just us,
right?
And then
back in your hometown, trying to start a thing
with literally we didn't have any money. We didn't have the business didn't have money. It was I remember walking around Northside on a rainy March day when we were living at our friend's house.
Who were we living at?
Ben and Jody. Yeah, remember that?
Yeah.
We've lived a lot of places over the past few years, but that was just a tough one, and figuring out, and then we got a $10K grant from this Tarsadia Family Foundation that hired us to write a partnership guide for nonprofits and creatives in India, which is just nuts, which kind of gave us a little life. And then I think of it as we started networking, and 2 things happened in that space.
So interested in what you're gonna say.
One,
I don't know how you frame it. That's good. Yeah.
One was serendipitous in that we got recommended to meet with this guy Terry Grundy from United Way, who liked what we were laying down and said, you got to talk to the head of community impact, and they wanted to invest in design thinking or human-centered design, and they were just talking about it right when we moved back to town.
Oh, wow.
And that was something that was just it was
just social innovation. It wasn't
social
human-centered.
innovation.
Yeah, they didn't. It was any kind of social innovation. But yeah.
But we came with some ideas and we partnered with them, and that's been an ongoing partnership.
We're still in a great partnership.
That was a beautiful thing that really gave us a basis for Cincinnati. And then we ran a free workshop that we invited people to, and some of those turned into some of our first partners in Cincinnati out of that.
Cool.
So that was kind of our
Yeah.
But it was definitely a 6 month
I'd say a year. Yeah.
Kind of oh shit.
Well, we got other
Yeah.
jobs. I mean, I remember
I got a full-time job at UC during that time period.
Yeah, you didn't come back and just hit the ground running. You had to rebuild from the ground up.
And we weren't sure. We didn't have a plan. I mean, we didn't. I mean, because we've been so invested in this one thing. It's almost, I'm thinking about this now. It's like when you do something for a while that you invest everything in, before you can do another thing, you need this period of reflection that has to go pretty deep in order to, I think, in order to make the right next move.
Yeah.
So I think we had a period. We threw a lot of stuff at the wall. We were taking kids to India. We were teaching classes at UC. Anyway, lots of different stuff.
Yeah. And you're still figuring it out. So you didn't move back. That last 6 months in India is not, we're going to build the business plan, we get back and hit the ground running. You moved back with an idea. And it sounds like to some degree out of necessity for you and for family.
Yeah.
But you didn't just hit the ground running. It took some time to rebuild
Absolutely.
it.
A time of feeling lost. I mean, just to be honest, of feeling really lost as people and working through that.
So it is funny. We're coming up with the 10-year anniversary of Design Impact this year, but literally it's there's a India and then after India, and it's at this point it's almost equal weights.
It's 4 and 6.
It's 4 and 6 or so. So it's just interesting that because we were a 10-year-old organization, but it really feels like we're a 6-year-old organization.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What were as you built that new organization, what was the same and what was different? And obviously you had to work through all of those questions, but how much of what you learned in India was directly applicable? How much did you have to relearn about the whole way that you are operating?
I think what was definitely applicable was how to run a project with a community partner, which is still what we do. It's how do you work with community members and an organization and understand what's happening between them relationally. How do you fund it? How do you do that in a co-creative way, from beginning of identifying the problem to doing discovery or research to synthesizing it to generating ideas and then implementing community-led solutions. What does that process look like? That took us years to figure out. And now we're doing such systems bigger. The projects, I would say, are more complex in nature, and so we're still learning about how to do that well. We'll always be learning about how to do that better, but that stayed the same, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the values were there, so just the values of just honoring the people that we're working with, and deeply investing in inclusion within the process and creativity within the process. Those are the kind of things I think stuck with.
Those stayed the same.
But the big difference was our change model was a fellowship program and doing specific on the ground projects, and that model wouldn't work for us in these states, and so we kind of morphed.
It might. We've always talked about trying to do it.
We've done it. We've actually placed a few fellows in the states.
Yeah.
What's different about it? What works and what doesn't?
Some of it's it's a funding thing. So there's something about there's a power dynamic that when you're pushing largely Western designers into India, that they will work and do what they would get paid in the States $70,000 to do. They will do that work for a lot less money
because
it's an experience, because it's a fellowship, because they're growing, and you can't frame that same fellowship in the States, I think, the same way. I don't know.
We've never talked about this.
I think there's for me, it's mostly a financial thing, where it's just sorry, go
ahead.
It's hard to fund the fellowship and pay fellows to do the work, and B, people, honestly, when they're doing work and communities are doing the work, they don't necessarily want a fellow. They want partners. They want people that are either part of their community for a long time. They want
They don't want somebody who
experts.
dropped in from another city and is going to leave in 3 months to
Yeah,
come.
or somebody who's like, if you're doing that, like who's, a couple years out of, grad school and maybe or maybe not has really the ability to like do this project well.
Yeah, I think that's what I think I'd say. We were better at doing the projects ourselves than running a fellowship.
Gotcha.
And also, I think social design is actually a real thing. And I still to this day don't think the best work is done by designers that have not worked. Like, I think to develop a practice in social design, I deeply believe it needs to be rooted in a practice of equity and inclusion, which is not what is trained in design school. And so I feel like for us, we became experts at social design, not human-centered design by itself, but social design, which must be informed in a multidisciplinary lens. That's my, how I see it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why what we offer now is way more valuable than somebody that's just like, hey, I think I want to do something meaningful with my life. Let me try to work on this super complex social challenge.
Right.
When I've been working in a design firm for the last 10 years or 5 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And obviously there's skills that are applicable. That's not to criticize those folks, but you know what I'm saying? Like,
No.
I think it's expertise in and of itself.
Well, so bringing my experience of you guys into this, because this is one of the, I've known both of you for a little while.
Yeah.
And
we
you
were
and
soccer
I.
coaches.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Kate coached my 17-year-old soccer team when he was like 10.
5, yeah.
I found a picture of that the other day. I'll have to send it to you.
That's cool.
But you and I had a conversation, Kate, like 4 years ago or something, maybe now, where we were talking. It's funny because we were talking about the idea of meaningful work.
Yeah.
And what that means, and that idea of somebody who's worked in any sector suddenly decides they want to do meaningful work.
Yeah.
And you challenged me at that point, which was a super meaningful, like I feel like pivotal conversation for me, where you said, why? What do you want to do? Do you want to actually make change? Or you just want to feel good about yourself? You didn't say it. You were much kinder to me than that. But that was basically what you were saying is, that the process of social change is a commitment and is something that you have to learn. And specifically what you did say is that you can't come into these situations where people are grappling with issues that affect their daily lives and have anything to say, first of all, authority is the wrong word, but any credibility. Without being invested in these situations for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And it challenged me at the time to think, well, I want to do meaningful work. Why? Do I want to do it just to assuage my conscience for a short period of time, or do I want to do it because I'm invested in long-term results and in people's lives? And I think that different mindset, with this podcast, we talk a lot about meaningful work. That means a lot of different things.
It does, yeah.
But that was the first time that I had talked to somebody who said, like, the first thing you got to do when you talk about why I want to do meaningful work is look at yourself and say, what are you trying to satisfy? And how is that going to hinder your participation in actually having any meaningful result?
Yeah.
And so,
well, I'm glad that was helpful.
it was
I feel like we
helpful.
still struggle with it. I mean, even just like, I don't know if you've talked about this. Early on, we had to talk about like, how do you separate ego from the work?
Yeah.
And we all need to do that to some degree, right? Because really, and that even ties back to some of that like white savior stuff of like, let me save the world. You know, what is that about? And that's actually about ego, and how do you identify when that's at play within you, and how do you get rid of that so it doesn't taint the purpose of the work.
It's certainly empathy that you talked about, but it's also and these are similar but not the same, humility of being able, and I've seen you guys do this in your work, of being able to come into a situation and say from a position of great humility, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how to solve this, and I won't know until I've spent a lot of time, and I may never know, you may know.
Yeah.
Like my job may ultimately be pulling out of your solution.
Yeah.
And not having to help you. And I think those are huge mindset shifts.
Yeah. It's stuff's hard. I mean, this might be a tangent.
But we're all about tangents. Go for it.
One of the things I've been grappling when we're hitting 10 years, and I don't know, one of the things I've been grappling with a lot lately is just even just trying to separate from the need for the work to go well. My colleague of mine who teaches me a lot, named Amy Houghton, is thinking about this with me and helping me think about it. But she she was a part of this fellowship, and she was with some amazing folks from all over the country who were really the founders and had done a lot of the major initial push on the environmental work in our country at the federal level. And they were all in their 70s and 80s, and had to look back, and almost all of what they had worked for is now being torn down and repealed. And I think that's what's really hard about this work, is that you don't always get to see the impact of it right away, or you also know that it can be destroyed. And like, how can you love, how can you show up without needing to know that it's fixed, you know? Because a lot of these problems are more complex than we can figure out, or there's not enough resources to do that, or there's much greater forces at play. So that's been, I mean, I don't have an answer for that. That's my own existential crisis right now, is what does that mean, and how do I still keep going knowing that it might get worse? I mean, as I'm watching, I mean, even the last 20 years I've been working on social change work, income and disparity has gotten worse, particularly around racial, when you pair that with race disparity. So yeah, it's hard. Sorry, it's depressing, but
No,
it's real.
but
It's real,
that's
you know?
the work. And that's actually
That's the
something I wanted to talk to you about, is that kind of Sisyphean task of continuing to push it up the hill. Another thing that you and I talked about is that idea where, in my experience of hearing about some of the stuff that you guys are working on, it's like somebody brings you a particular challenge. They want to solve a very specific or discrete problem. I want to, you know, this doesn't exist. It needs to exist. Let's make this. But when you start to look at the systemic factors that contribute to that,
Right.
and you're like, well, how do we not just fix this problem? How do we deal with those issues? But those issues go back to decades of political leadership and the founding of the country, and like
Minimum
an
wage,
entire
what it is, all those
philosophy
things.
of life.
Yeah.
And where do you decide to plug in based on what you can actually do without getting overwhelmed by these issues? How do you guys individually and together continue to bring yourself to this work for now 10 years and not get overwhelmed by the scope of the task overall, or by the current political climate and the resistance that creates?
Do you want me to go first?
Go first. I mean,
I mean, I think that's really hard. I think Ramsey naturally deals with it better than I do. I think I would call myself a sensitive person, so I have all the feels, and so I've had to do a lot of work on that. I think that ego work is important, like separating. I think I try to meditate every day. I think because I need to have some space from my emotions and to distance myself. That's a huge part of what I've been able to keep doing the work. Our marriage is a huge part of why I think I lean into Ramsey so hard. I mean, Ramsey's a really joyful, happy human, and finding humor in the work. I think creativity, like the infusion of creativity, I'll never let go in our work. And I think it's undervalued a lot in social change work, because there's joy in it and there's creation in it. And just as we're talking about essentially destruction,
Right.
what is the creation? And I try and focus on the creation as a source of joy in life, as a place to get energy from. And then consistent perspective from elders, from other people that have been in the work to help. I mean, there's so many folks along the path that have helped me get perspective and understand that. And then we went to a 4-day work week 2 years ago, which was huge in terms of work-life balance. And
what did it do for you?
it allowed me to give myself permission to take care of myself. That's really, it was about taking care of myself so that I could show up and do the work better. And so I think we've done a lot of work on our own work-life balance. So we work really hard. We work 36, 40 hours a week, but we have a house in the woods for a reason. We try and get away, where we draw pretty firm boundaries on that. And that I would need in order to keep doing the work. That's what I'd say in terms of those are the things that keep me going. I don't know. What'd you say?
I mean, like, there's the personal care part of that, which for me is
Bourbon. No, I wasn't saying that for you. I forgot to mention.
Nice timing.
Bourbon helps.
Now I don't need to make a self-deprecating joke, so that's fine. No, it's like art projects. I do a lot of art projects and building projects. Like something that just takes the other part of your brain, is totally disassociated.
Yeah.
And then there's a part of it where it's trying to live out the values that you espouse in work. So then, how do you show up in community with family, with friends, with some of those same values, but within spaces where, like, it's not that you even have any more influence or control, but like you can see change in different ways, you know? So I think that's, to me, is really a helpful thing, is to just like not turn that off when we leave per se, but to look at the rest of our life through some of those lenses, where it can be less frustrating or less challenging. And then also I think that, you know, as an org, I think one of the fears is that, you know, like, so you do this for 20, 30 years and you're like, what did I do during that time? Like, I feel like I was, you know, doing the right work, or I was on the right side of things, but like, what happened? And then we've talked to a lot of people that have had careers in the social sector, and that's, you know, they're, you know, a lot of baby boomers retiring out, and that's kind of like their reflective space, which is, you know, it's hard not to hear that in work. And I do feel like, I don't think we have a solution to that. I mean, but I feel like what we do well as an organization is learn, and we challenge ourselves to do better, and to pursue excellence, and to, you know, realize greater impact. And we don't really have an interest in to keep doing the work the same way we've always done it, just because we can find people that want to partner with us to do that. So we are taking risks, trying new things, and really are moving in different directions. So I feel like one of the things we do a lot of are like relatively acute, like programmatic service, you know, solutions, like where it's like, hey, like this is a problem, how can we think about solving that? But we've been really proactive in spending a lot of our company's time and energy trying to move what I would say is upstream from that. So how do you start moving from those into like that, like Kate spoke about earlier, that deeper reflection within the system? How do you start taking concepts of advocacy and policy change? Because to your points around like, you know, like people see backsliding on some of the hard work they've done. And it's not that policies and advocacy can't backslide, but the fact is that you can take huge chunks out. So how do we start to build that capacity in the back end of projects? I don't know, so I think we're doing work. Once again, I don't have like a belief that it's actually going to be like, whoa, like you guys unlocked how to like make an equitable society, you know, with your little 10-person design firm. But I mean, like, I do feel like with something that helps me rest at night is knowing that we're doing due diligence.
That's okay.
know,
That's I agree.
Yeah.
It's interesting, that idea. Like, it seems like it would be something that is key to any long-term career in this work, is the idea that the work that you're doing is somehow based more on due diligence than it is on immediate outcomes. And somehow being okay with that.
Right.
Like, not theoretically being okay with
No,
that,
but, like,
because one day
actually
it's going to
being
stare
okay.
you in the face. One day you're going to look back at your work and say,
Right.
this is what I did.
Right. You know?
Yeah.
And just learn, I mean, and which is hard because you learn about things that sometimes can cast a shadow on some of the work that you recently did, simply because you're learning from that work and you're learning from what the world's learning at the same time. So.
Right. And the work kits, what the work takes and what it takes to make it effective changes changes over time.
Absolutely.
Changes rapidly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if we were still running a fellowship program, we would not be running. You wouldn't be talking to us right here. We would not be doing it. You know?
Yeah. True.
For sure.
Yeah.
Interesting. How does the kind of the last thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about is how this work and this perspective comes back. We talked a lot about the inextricability of this from your personal lives and how you guys work together. Has your relationship changed in any significant ways around the work? Do you feel like the ways that you work together are still sort of the ways that you imagined yourselves working together all those years ago?
What are you gonna say?
I mean, I used to be our accountant.
He did. It was
Which
awful.
and I mean, like,
It
you know,
was
literally
dangerous.
we have an operations director now who
Thank God.
has seen those books, and she's like, I hope we never get audited because they aren't 10 years old yet and they are not real. So like that's changed a little bit.
Yeah, totally.
We struggled. I think we didn't struggle a lot, but like, so, you know, you have titles, you know, and we're co-founders. And Kate is, you know, I would used to say like technically the ED, you know, and that like we shared executive director-ish sort of things. I'm the design director, you know, that doesn't have quite the same amount of meaning, you know. But I would say that over the years, like she's emerged as like the strategic visionary of design impact. You know, I would say, like
Okay.
that's real.
You
You know,
are.
I mean, like, and not just like, and she carries weight for, kind of what the big next is, what we need to do. That idea of like constant improvement. I mean, I'm not much of a person who's big on feedback, so that's not coming from me. That's coming from her. And just the developing the culture of the organization to like accept that and move forward together. Like that's just like that's been a change. I mean, it's been a change. I think we've managed it well, and I still show up and do a lot of good work for
does
the
a ton of work,
organization.
yeah.
But I would say that like where we started is kind of like very much like a shoulder to shoulder leadership sort of thing. Like I would say that Kate's the leader of the organization at this point. That's changed. That's real.
What hasn't changed is, I think, how close we are through the work and how much we need each other to do the work. And I couldn't imagine doing it without
Yeah, there's no way. No. I mean, I know for a fact that the business would fail without Kate. It might survive without me, but I don't think Kate would survive without me. So
No, I
what do you
wouldn't.
think?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Right on. Last question is, in a large sense, how does your experience now inform how you want? You have a beautiful son.
Thank you.
What do you want to teach him about work? Like you
Oh,
guys
that's a
have a
good question.
really unique relationship to work, and do you think at all about? I mean, that's ways
That's a
off
really
for
neat
him.
question. I mean, I could. Well, what first came? What were you going to say? Something?
No, I wasn't. No.
I don't know. I'd like to think about that more. But what first came to my mind? I mean, I think about part of the. If I'm being really honest, part of the reason I wanted to start Design Impact is that I hadn't found a really healthy work culture, and I feel like I think in Ramsey hadn't found a place where his work he felt had really the impact in the world he wanted it to. And I think what I want my kid to know about work is that you can have a life where you are respected and you get to work out of your strengths and you are surrounded by people that love you and challenge you in loving ways and do good in the world, or whatever that means for you, all at the same time.
It's not too much to ask for.
It's not. You might have to build it,
Right.
but it doesn't mean that you can't have that and that you should seek that, because you're with the people you work with more than you're with your family.
Yeah.
So like I got to think real intentionally about who the hell those people are. And I am honored to work with our colleagues. I mean, they're an amazing group of people that, thank God, I get to work with those people every day, and that matters.
Yeah.
And so that's what I would say. I don't know.
Well,
What would you tell them about work?
because I was thinking like.
Oh, but did I misstate the question?
No.
Okay.
I mean, you got a great answer. It just made me think my own answer was like.
No, your answer's great, I'm sure.
I mean, I was gonna say like work ethic.
Yeah, you do have a
No, sure.
Ramsey
Like,
works his ass off.
you gotta be able to lay it down sometimes.
You have to
like,
work
an
hard.
ability to like
Yeah.
understand how to solve problems like generically, like an orientation to
Yeah.
that, and then to build relationships. So I think one of the things that
Healthy,
I wish
yeah.
I'd known earlier in my career was just like how important relationships are, like in like a micro working sense, but then just be in terms of it's like why people try to send their kids to Ivy League schools is because you build a set of relationships that you can
Do you mean
leverage.
networking or do you mean
I
relationships?
mean, kind of both, but like that idea that like every time you talk to somebody, like it's an opportunity to learn, it's an opportunity to grow, it's an opportunity that could like become actual opportunities to do work,
Yeah.
and make the world a better place, however you want to look at it.
I like the way you're framing it.
And just that like, and there's simple ways to do that, and there's meaningful
Yeah.
ways to do that, but it's a skill set that I think is really. I mean, I'm thinking about like I'm thinking when you framed it as like our beautiful 2-year-old. I'm thinking about like,
gonna put him to
like
work?
how can he be as successful as possible and never move back into my house at 16 years? I'm already there. But
Right
so
now
that's
we
what I
gotta
was
get him to
thinking.
put his toys away. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing it yet.
Yeah.
No, but that's beautiful because it's both sides of it. It is like, the sort of emotional
Like he can have it all,
relationship
yeah.
to work and the practical
do some
relationship
stuff.
Work
too.
done.
You gotta
Yeah.
do it, and you gotta see.
Yeah.
I hate networking. I've always considered myself a horrible networker, but when you frame it in terms of, I'm all about relationships.
Learning,
And when I think about
I
making
agree.
relationships with people and seeing those as the groundwork that the sort of tapestry of your life's work is laid on, that I can embrace. So those I think those are amazing lessons. Those are certainly, I would imagine, I'm sitting here thinking, I can go home and I can do work on approaching my relationships that way more intentionally, but also like holding myself to the standard of saying, if I'm in a place where I'm unhappy, if I'm in a place that's not fulfilling to me, if I'm in a place where the relationships are toxic, something better can exist, and I should expect and hope for it and try to create it myself if I can't find it. Those are amazing.
It's a design
lessons.
problem.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
But inspirational to anybody who's listening, even if they're not 2 years old.
Yeah.
Because I know my 2-year-old's certainly not listening.
He's not listening too much at all right now.
No. I just hope at some point he does.
Down the road. We'll archive it. It's on the internet. The internet's forever. It'll be there. You guys, thank you so much.
Oh, it's an honor. It's just thank you. It just is, it's humbling to get to, just for someone to ask about our story and to care and to want to hear about it. It just means a lot to us. It's our life, and it just means a lot that you would want to spend the time to talk with us about it.
Well, I want to say everything that you've said about the quality of the people that work for you, I can attest because I've met and talked to all of them, but they say the same things about both of you, over and over and over again. So you guys are doing great things. It's an honor and a pleasure to know you and to talk to both of you.
Thanks,
Back at you, Brandon.
Thank you. This episode of The Distiller was recorded live at Branch Restaurant at 1535 Madison Road in East Walnut Hills, Cincinnati. Thanks to John Ford and the staff of Branch for hosting us. You can see photos of their beautiful new space, including Night Drop, the downstairs craft cocktail bar, and links to Branch's website and social media pages on our website at thedistillerpodcast.com. Stop by Branch, say hi to John and the crew, and be sure to tell them thanks for hosting The Distiller. And thanks so much to Ramsey and Kate for sharing their amazing work and their story with us. If you want to find out more about the work that Design Impact is doing in Cincinnati and around the United States, we have links to their website and social media pages at thedistillerpodcast.com. Kate mentioned some of the resources they've produced, including their 2018 annual report, which are amazing, inspiring examples of the great work Kate, Ramsey, and the entire Design Impact team are doing. You can learn more, get in touch with them, support their work, and maybe even hire Design Impact to help make your work, your process, or your company more equitable and more inclusive. Find all of that on thedistillerpodcast.com, and we'd be happy to put you in touch with them. The Distiller is produced, recorded, and hosted by me, Brandon Dawson. Our show is mixed and edited by Justin Golden. Our logo was designed by Scott Ryan, and our videos are by Mike Helm of Minute Moments Pictures. You can find The Distiller wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can listen and download every episode of The Distiller at thedistillerpodcast.com with links, photos of the guests, and a map of all the show locations. If you like what we're doing, please spread the word. Follow and share our posts on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you'd like to help us cover some of the expenses of creating The Distiller, you can support The Distiller on Patreon. Just go to thedistillerpodcast.com and click on the Become a Patron button for more information. And finally, we would love it if you'd rate and review The Distiller wherever you listen and help us get the word out about the show. You can always email us at mail@thedistillerpodcast.com to tell us who you think should be on The Distiller to talk about their search for meaningful work or where you think we should record the next show. Whether it's by email, on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, please drop us a line. We always love to hear from you. Until next time, I'm Brandon Dawson. Thanks for listening to The Distiller. Bye-bye.